Hi, this is your host Abdul Bhartia, and we are here at Open Source Summit in Bilbao, Spain. And today we have with us Ben Fontan, Community Manager at Alliander. Ben, it's great to have you on the show.
Yes, good morning. Nice to be here.
You recently joined Alliander 4 or 5 months ago,
Yeah.
but you have been in this open source community world for a much longer time.
Yes, sure.
Yeah, so I would like to quickly talk a bit about, especially when we look at events like Open Source Summit and your own involvement with open source. I used to live in Europe, and there is a lot of grassroots open source movement in Europe.
Exactly.
At the community level, it's not as much as we see in the United States. So, talk a bit about the open source movement or the evolution of open source that you have seen here.
I have been a community manager for a real grassroots project for years and years, which was a community, a content management system, I should say, not a community management system. And I think I was in that project like when there were like 10 developers, and it really grew to a community of like thousands of people almost. And community management there was very much about aligning the people and the projects, because you could really see people working on the same kind of topic. And what my mission was at that point, getting the noses in the same direction of what these people were doing. So I think that's one of the things that I saw, and there were a lot of grassroots projects going on. I think, like with Alliander, you're facing a typically difficult, or not difficult, sometimes difficult, but a very different approach, because you work with companies in the community.
And that's bring me to the next question, which is, when we look at the grassroots open source movement, and now big organizations, they are embracing open source. And Linux Foundation, they have played a very important role in kind of paving a path for organizations, corporate players,
Yes.
to kind of start embracing open source, not just consume but also contribute.
Yes.
And that is very tricky part, because you have to deal with legal, you have to deal with IP, you have to change the culture.
Yeah.
So talk also a bit about the balance of, once again, companies like Alliander, which is also, if I'm not wrong, semi-public as well, because it's a whole different kind of setup there. So let's look at it, community, open source, from a corporate perspective.
What you get there is also looking at what the goals of different companies are, and I think in a company culture, you also see. I think one of the main things is what I'm working with a lot is the whole idea of short-term and long-term goals. And if you work in a company culture, it's very much about the short-term values. How can you make fast progress? While community building itself is more kind of a long-term thing. But then you're also right in saying, I think Alliander is maybe a bit of a different player than the commercial companies being publicly funded. I can really see that Alliander being public, they have got a very good perception of what open source can do for them as a company.
We did mention that Alliander is public. By public owned, I don't mean publicly traded. It's like
Yeah.
partially government owned, and that happens in a lot of countries. Does this also make it a bit different when you look at the community management and the corporate culture? Because once a company is like fully corporate versus semi-corporate, culture also changes. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, you can definitely see actually, me coming from a grassroots background, where you have more organic growth from a community. You have several developers that have an idea to develop some piece of software, and there you see a lot of enthusiasm that you can really work with. I'm not saying that's different in the company culture. The enthusiasm is definitely there, but you also see, like I said before, the kind of company-driven mentality. So we want to achieve goals, and I honestly speaking, and that's also what the Linux Foundation is about. What are the commercial goals, and how can we tie that to the open source collaboration?
As you said, the goals, corporate goals are different, because they're, once again, their vision is different. Community open source goal is different. Also because when you are involved with open source projects, open source communities, a lot of code is written outside of your company. It is written by a community. So you really don't have any control over that. And this could also be the code that Alliander wrote, but it contributed to an open source foundation like Linux Foundation Energy, right? At the same time, when you're working internally, you can move the code base at your own pace based on the needs of the marketing and sales teams. But when you're working on open source, their velocity is based on the community's need. So how, as a community manager, because you're juggling between a lot of balls, you're juggling with internal open source developers, you're juggling with the community developers, which could also involve your competitors and also other vendors like RTE and other, global scale, and also the open source community.
Well, maybe I think it's interesting that you put it this way. So I would even say it's so the struggle is often in finding the connecting points within the community, and then I think I would always find it problematic to look at it from the struggle perspective, because what you like to do as a community manager is facilitate as much as possible the collaborative aspects, So what I can also see in these projects, that there's so many opportunities for collaboration, And I think that's why it's good that you have a separate community manager, because I think in a lot of instances, the community management is kind of taken for granted, or not for granted. Usually it would be something that this one person in the project can do as a side job. But I don't think it works like that, because it's very much the team itself, the developers really have a focus on, creating this awesome software. And what I can really see in this project I'm currently working in, that there's so many opportunities for collaboration even within the team, where you can see, okay, they're working on this issue. And then what I would do as a community manager is ask, hey, what's the status of this? Can we help you out with this? Are you happy that things are going like they're going? So kind of creating an atmosphere of communication within the team, but also without the team, outside of the team.
No, you put it perfectly. Yeah, it's not a struggle. And that's the kind of role of a community manager. And which brings me to another curious question: is that what is the role of a community manager? Because you said somebody can do it part-time, but what is the role of community manager at a company like Alliander? What do you exactly do?
Yeah. I think that's always an interesting question. What makes people really wonder what exactly does a job like that comprise? I would say, from what I've seen in the years that I've been doing community management, that is very much about creating a safe space also for people to be able to communicate. I think, in some of the projects that I came across, the team is very much focused on only producing the software, only working with the software. And what I try to do, really focus on the community aspect. What are we as a team? So I bring up in the team meetings, how was your holiday? Don't you enjoy the weather and things like this? In order to create a more social, coherent environment. And after that, we get engaged with the technical topics. So I think basically, maybe that's a bit the difference. What you described earlier with DevRel. So community management is very much about the social connections, I would say.
Will it be wrong to say that if you look at open source, or if you look at open source community, let's just keep a very myopic view and just look at open source. It's less about code, it's less about technology, it's more about people, actually, it's more about collaboration.
I think in the end, and maybe also with something like NF Energy, but that goes for all projects in the end, but LF Energy specifically, you're also looking at a greater goal, so to speak, what you work with your project. So we're working on digital substation automation, but in the end, the goal would be also to make this software available for countries that don't have a big budget, and what we say a lot in our team is also to enable the energy transition. So in that sense, it's not something that you do from a technical perspective, but it's also something that you do from a human perspective.
So what you're saying is that it's not just about First of all, you cannot manage an open source community. That's a raw today
No,
open
I
source
think that
community.
that's
No,
interesting.
that's why the
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah,
the thing
yeah.
is, you are more or less like facilitating them, because a lot of folks
Exactly,
who
exactly, yeah.
who get involved with open source, and some of these developers, they don't know communication skills. They don't have marketing skills. So you kind of create a buffer also at the same time. But what you're also saying is that especially in the case of LF Energy, it goes beyond just the code. It goes beyond just a local community of developer about a larger vision of the world that we are going to live in. We should be whether it is climate change. So as a community manager, when you do engage and involve with your team there, do you also like or talk about these broad topics, or is more about, hey, you know what, the code is written, the marketing teams have these goals we have to meet, or the
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
LFNG,
yeah,
or you
yeah.
also do have this when you sit down and talk, you
Yeah.
do talk about these larger goals?
That's a great question. We do talk about this, but this is not typically a topic that we would address in the team meetings themselves. So you're really giving me ideas, but we do discuss this, on a personal basis, of course, because that's the stuff we're working on. Yeah, I really like it. I mean, so your question also kind of comes back to what we discussed earlier with the long-term and short-term goals, or just vice versa. I think this is something maybe that a lot of companies in open source are struggling with, to keep a vision on this long term, even though some of the things that you're working on, like community building, might not pay off immediately, but keeping in mind that they will do at a certain point. And that's the same we're working on with the environment, and the stuff we do with LF Energy. That's all a long-term vision.
Once again, I was trying to drive in the direction, because when we look at some of the code, of course, if you're a developer, you are passionate about the code. But the thing is, at some point, you get burnout. I mean, writing the same. But when you talk about the larger vision, and when you see that the work that you're doing is going to have a larger impact, and that is why if you look at the popular culture, it's about the human story, the holy. So when you talk about the larger vision, which vision goes beyond a company, which is a global vision, the climate change. Then we look at little shorter vision, which is the vision of the company for the next 10 years. And then we move in closer to the vision of the community, next release, which is 6 months. So these are three different visions. So how much are you involved with these set of vision, or you see that community manager is involved?
Yeah, sure. But I really like how you put that. I mean, the title itself, community manager, always kind of, it didn't feel really right for me. I mean, it's really about facilitating.
I look at community
Yeah.
management as enabler.
Yes,
and
enabler, facilitating, yeah.
Yeah, goal. It goes beyond just to a small set. It enables a lot of things. So yeah.
Well, I guess, I mean, even without being a developer, in the team meetings, you can really sense, the urgency of some point. So I can see that, I can feel that. So even though I'm not a developer or don't know about the specific problems, I can definitely address them, or ask a developer or a team, are you really happy with how the teams are progressing? And I would like to get back to your earlier question also with regards to long-term, short-term. I think one of the things that I've also been discussing with quite a few people here also after a few other talks, that I think, if you talk about long-term and short-term objectives, often the projects really have very big goals. So they will be very difficult to achieve in a very short time. And then what I think is so important, to be able to find the small steps in a project, to identify them, and also be able to celebrate a small achievement. And that's very doable, but in some of the conversations that I had, I see that people are really struggling with that.
Let's stick to the term community manager for a second.
Yes,
Okay.
we have to, because that's just what it's
Yeah.
called. Yeah.
And when we look at organizations like Alliander, you folks said the company has been around for such a long time. A lot of folks who are there have been working as a proprietary developers. Now they are embracing open source.
Yes.
At the same time, you're getting a lot of new developers who just get out of college,
Yeah.
and most of these actually did already know open source, because that's how they get exposed to, or may not. So I also want to understand that how do you also work internally with the newcomers to or the folks who have been working on for code base for a long time, so that it's less about the code you're writing, is also about the larger community. The code will be used largely. So the culture, the way they approach is different. It's not about I have written these 3 lines of code that will also be looked at by my manager.
Yeah, yeah,
That
yeah, yeah,
this
yeah.
is the. But it's more about you have to collaborate. You have to give away your work. So talk about the cultural aspect that you deal with internally, whether it's new developers or the old ones.
Okay, that's an interesting question. So culturally, then I would like to talk about, how I experienced that I think the last couple of weeks, and then I've been talking to the open source initiative people also about that, and I think I really would like to write an article also about this. But also as a community manager, you do get a kind of a blind spot for these things, Then also you see new people coming in, or you've got old people, or not, I wouldn't say old people, but people who have been in the company culture longer. And so from my perspective, I do see that sometimes you really take for granted, that having been in open source culture for like 20 years, that collaboration is such a given. That's something that you do. So I really found out, if you're speaking about the difference between newcomers and people that might have been longer in a company, that doesn't make so much of a difference. I mean, what you need to do is really to listen to what the needs are, of people. So then I find, if we speak about a human-to-human interaction or culture, like we mentioned before, that's just what it is about. So even if you're not so accustomed, to working with open source, or you've been grown up with it, this is really something, if you just listen to what the needs of people are, you just get there to have this proper collaboration. That makes sense.
One more thing, as we're talking about, hey, community manager may not be the right term or whatever. That's totally different. We have to settle down on these some terms, right? Otherwise, we're termless. But when we look at open source, or we look at just code development, we get so obsessed and focused on code writing. Yes. But the fact is, there's so many other things involved.
Yes, definitely.
Communication is very important. Hey, what you have written, communication is also building a community is important. Yeah. Collaboration is important. Yeah. Documentation is important. So talk about the other aspects of a community, which are often overlooked.
It makes me laugh a little bit, because sometimes they say that the code is the easiest part of a project. But so there's so much around that. Communication is such an important point. I mean, how many technical projects do you know when you visit their website that you just have no idea what it's actually about? I mean, and I think that's also a mission for a community manager. I mean, there's stuff internally that you need to take care of, but there's also stuff that you need to take care of externally. You would also want people that are not a developer or are not a technical manager to be able to understand what you're working on. I mean, there's no telling, in how many missed opportunities you would have. So, and besides the communication, in a team, there's so much stuff that you need to take care of beside the coding. So for us at this point, and also we are very thankful also with the Compass project we're working on, that we're part of LF Energy. And the other project we're working on, we are really hoping to get that under the LF Energy umbrella, where things like marketing, help with writing articles is being offered, creating events, or creating working groups. And a lot of this kind of infrastructure is graciously offered by the LF Energy. So I think as community manager, and having the facilitation that LF Energy does, really takes a load off the whole team's shoulders. So that's all the things like organizing events, or helping with marketing. That's not something that we have to do as a team, and we can really focus on the coding and making a good software project.
Can you also talk a bit about when you look at the larger LF Energy, picture, and as you also said, the problem that we are trying to solve here goes beyond just Netherlands or France. So how do you see Alliander or your team playing a role in this bigger picture?
Yeah, sure, sure. So if you look at LF Energy itself, I mean, I've been looking at the landscape, which are not specifically in the presentation. We saw like almost 1,000 projects, which are not all part of LF Energy, but within LF Energy itself, there are so many projects, also kind of working on the same topics. And I think there's a lot of opportunities also within LF Energy to kind of cooperate under specific sections. So, for instance, substation automation or other kind of topics.
Ben, thank you so much for taking time out today, and of course, talk about the role of community manager in organizations like Alliander, who are contributing heavily to open source project and to make this world a better and safer place. Thanks for all your insights, and I would love to chat with you again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was an honor to be with you.